Born John Wesley Battiste on November 24th, 1941, to Luther J. Battiste and Geraldine Gerdine Battiste in Kingstree, South Carolina, in the county of Williamsburg. John has always been naturally curious, and he would often tell stories, but mostly those stories about he and his mom's interaction. He said Mama would be calling out to me, and I would go on about my business and diving off of that bridge down there at Black River and swimming, trying to pretend that I did not hear her voice in the echoes calling out my name. And I would get my behind worn out pretty often just because I favored swimming and fishing over doing my chores. Growing up in the South, one of the earliest lessons children of color were sadly taught was about how white folks saw them and about how very little value they were regarded with. John was never one that would take kindly to the ill treatment. Early in his life, he began to take mental notes about what was wrong and what must be changed. John grew up in South Carolina, where cotton was king and Jim Crow dominated. The forecast for black youth was bleak in the United States of America, but especially so in the South. John's parents understood this fact and knew that unless something was done differently, there would not be any chance of much of a future for John nor his other siblings. It was not long before John was sent off to the state of New York to attend private school. 1961 brought John to Howard University, and Howard University brought Gloria Richardson to John Battiste. Gloria Richardson was the leader of the Cambridge movement, and she recruited John from Howard to join SNCC.
Ain't gonna let nobody turn me around, turn me around, turn me around. Ain't gonna let nobody turn me around. I just keep on walking, keep on talking, marching on the freedom land. Ain't gonna let nobody.
Somewhere I read of the freedom of assembly. Somewhere I read of the freedom of speech. Somewhere I read of the freedom of press. Somewhere I read that the greatness of America is the right to protest far right.
Well, my trouble is hard, so hard. Well, my trouble is hard, so hard.
SNCC's job was to facilitate whatever these students needed. If they went to jail, it was to find a way to get them out of jail. SNCC's job was not to dictate to these communities what their movement was about. The organization really just did the coordination to support all of these student activities that happened from Nashville all through the Carolinas.
The Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. Gloria was a 1941 graduate of Howard University herself, and she sought out those that had the physical and mental agility to confront the ugliness of this struggle. John would soon become one of Gloria's aides and advisors. John soon joined Gloria on the eastern shore of Maryland and the city of Cambridge. The citizens in Cambridge were facing similar problems as other black communities all over this country.
Well, Cambridge, when we first went over, was basically trying to organize the community to have protests in that community. And each time the protests ended up in some kind of violent scuffle, and at a point there you had martial law in Cambridge.
The entire scene was chaotic. It became more dangerous by the second. There were many people that were injured. Some were being carted away to jail, and others just stood bewildered in sheer disbelief about what was unfolding before their eyes. In an effort to make some kind of sense about what was happening and to gain some sort of order, Gloria climbed up into a military vehicle to speak to the people. I stood at the foot of that vehicle that was surrounded by soldiers with automatic rifles and bayonets. Everywhere around us, the buildings were burning. The atmosphere was thick with the smell of mustard gas, smoke from the burning, and the stench of anger. Many of us did retreat to the SNCC house for cover and to reassess things. Only for a short time after, the National Guard assembled outside the SNCC building to escort our black asses off to jail. We all stood and watched them coming from an upstairs window. We saw them as they pulled up, and Gloria and I kind of figured that we were about to be arrested, and so we led the way, with the National Guards at our backs and a long line of our fellow protesters behind us. We were hauled off to jail. They took us to Pikesville, where we were held overnight.
Gloria was a little bit more radical than most people had expected, and she was one of those. First, she was a Howard graduate, so that was one of the connections that she had with NAG, and so she was able to get additional NAG. John Battiste from Howard actually goes up, and Reggie Robinson is in Cambridge, Maryland. And then it got to the point where Robert Kennedy wanted to intercede and see if he could find a remedy for Cambridge. And so I think what he ended up doing was extending the martial law. It stayed in place for a little over a year in Cambridge, and they began to have some dialogues between the community about desegregation of Cambridge.
That riot sent reverberations from Cambridge clear to the White House, as Attorney General Robert Kennedy requested the presence of Gloria Richardson and the other SNCC leadership. And out of that was birthed the Treaty of Cambridge. And that particular document covered a lot of the foundational work that I, along with SNCC, had done towards one, total desegregation, two, the right to access public accommodations, and mandates for public schools and housing were addressed within that document.
Freedom fighters that exist all over the world, and they're in different forms, different groups. Some take governments like in Venezuela, Cuba, Zimbabwe, and even in Ethiopia now, they're trying to make war. So the struggle continues, and we have to continue to fight. We have to define what freedom is. We don't find freedom under these white folks. If you got to go to white folks and beg them for some rights and beg them to treat you good or bad, then you ain't free. So we have to, as a people, take our freedom. Like the Chinese don't have to ask a white man for nothing. They make whatever they got, and they got an army to back it up. We need the same thing. We can't depend on these white folks. All of them the same thing, all of them in the same bed, Biden in the same bed with the man just left office. And even when black folk get in office, they ain't no freedom fighter like us. They get it off and up there kissing the white man's butt. That's what they doing in South Carolina Congress. Y'all got now ain't nothing but a butt killer. What's that man name? Up there lying like, hey, I'm black too, boss. Look, I'm black too, but I love you. And all that kind of stuff. We gotta get rid of all that. And the freedom fighters, they didn't let people like Ramona get in office. They didn't let people like John get in office. And we didn't want it because we wasn't gonna lie to nobody, wasn't gonna trick nobody. We want freedom, and if we can't have freedom, if we can't tell the truth, we wasn't gonna tell nothing. And now a lot of people got in there and they just want to be side with the white folk and get a few white folk, black folk that look good, and the rest of us starving. So the struggle continued and it never stopped, and it'll never stop until we get free. They didn't drop the ball, they just hid the truth from it. They hid John from the people. They hid Cleve from the people. They hired SNCC from the people. You see very few people talk about SNCC, and we were the main organization of the 60s. Yeah, we got that.
Okay, all right, I got that. Now go ahead, tell us what you got on your mind.
Just sitting here and listening to the conversation going back and forth, it brings back many memories. And oftentimes I thought about how lucky we were, because we made it. We made it out. So many didn't. So we have to carry on the struggle for those that didn't. And we are blessed that we're sitting here today and talking about the movement. But there are thousands who sacrificed. And we are pushed forward to the front. And so we have to have the voice for those that don't have a voice. And I want to thank you guys. I'm just so full today.
Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Lord.
Thank you.